Flight attention humiliated Denzel Washington. Take this off or get off the plane now, because of his cross necklace he wore in first class and lived to regret. The soft hum of the jet engines was interrupted only by the muted clink of glasses as a flight attendant glided through the plush first-class cabin. Her polished shoes silent against the carpeted aisle. The scent of fresh leather and expensive cologne hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of champagne. Outside the windows, the last rays of sunlight bathed the tarmac in molten gold as passengers settled into their seats for the long-haul flight to London. It should have been a seamless boarding process, yet an almost imperceptible tension pulsed in the air like a distant thundercloud, sensed but unseen. Before we get into the story, comment below where you are watching from today. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Emily Carter adjusted the scarf around her neck as she surveyed the cabin, her lips curling into a polite smile as she counted heads. First class was her domain, and she prided herself on keeping it immaculate, its tranquility unmarred by unruly passengers or breaches of etiquette. But her eyes stopped at one man seated quietly near the front, and her brows drew together almost imperceptibly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm, unhurried demeanor that radiated quiet confidence. A book lay open in his lap as he thumbed through the pages, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. But what caught Emily's attention wasn't his composed presence, or even the designer clothes tailored impeccably to his frame. It was the large gold cross necklace resting proudly over his crisp white shirt. Her first thought was instinctive. That's bold. Too bold for first class. She'd served enough high-net-worth individuals to know their preferences for subtlety. The necklace seemed like an ostentatious display, the kind worn by those trying to broadcast a status they hadn't truly earned. She moved closer, her practiced smile intact, but her thoughts sharp. Could he really be a first-class passenger? Or had he somehow talked his way up here? She had encountered her share of smooth operators over the years, people who dressed the part but had no business sitting among CEOs and foreign dignitaries. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice calm yet tinged with the faintest edge of authority. He looked up slowly, his dark eyes locking on hers with a warmth that surprised her. "Yes," he said, his voice deep, even, and utterly unbothered. Emily hesitated for half a beat. Something in his tone suggested he was not a man accustomed to being challenged. Still, she pressed on. "That's quite a striking necklace. Airline policy prefers understated jewelry in first class. May I ask you to remove it?" His brow furrowed slightly, though his lips remained in a neutral line. "I'm sorry. Did I hear you right?" "Yes, sir. This is first class. We do maintain certain standards for passenger attire and accessories. That necklace," she gestured delicately toward the cross, "may be considered disruptive to the refined ambience we strive for." A faint chuckle rumbled in his chest, though his expression remained composed. He closed his book softly and folded his hands over it. "Disruptive? To whom?" Emily shifted her weight. It might be interpreted as excessively conspicuous. "I'm sure you understand." "Actually," he said, his tone firming but not unkind, "I don't." 2 rows back, Marcus Green, another black man in a tailored navy suit, watched with quiet disbelief. He leaned toward his wife and whispered, "She doesn't recognize him." The whisper carried just far enough for Emily to notice. She felt a flicker of doubt but quickly pushed it down. She was doing her job. Standards had to be upheld. "Sir, I'm not trying to be difficult," Emily said, softening her tone slightly. "It's just that if you'd kindly remove the necklace for the duration of the flight, it would be much appreciated. Otherwise..." "Otherwise what?" His voice was still calm but carried a subtle edge now, like a blade sheathed in velvet. Emily felt her pulse quicken. The air seemed thicker somehow. Every pair of eyes in first class now fixed squarely on her and the man she had confronted. She stood straighter, her authority threatened but not yet defeated. "Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft." There was a sharp intake of breath from the surrounding passengers. A middle-aged woman in pearls clutched her phone, beginning to record discreetly. "Denzel Washington," though Emily still hadn't grasped who she was speaking to. Let the words settle in the space between them. He exhaled slowly, as though wrestling with something heavier than annoyance. "Take off my cross," he repeated softly, almost to himself. "Or get off the plane." "Yes, sir," Emily said, summoning her sternest professional tone. "Those are the options." He leaned back slightly in his seat, eyes never leaving hers. "Do you know who I am?" Emily crossed her arms lightly. "A man making things unnecessarily difficult in first class." Marcus Green's wife gasped audibly. "Oh my God, she's going to lose her job," she murmured. At that moment, Sandra Lee, the senior flight attendant, appeared, her expression tight with concern. "Emily?" she said quickly, stepping between them. "Can I have a word?" Emily stiffened but didn't break eye contact with the passenger. "Sandra, I'm handling this." Sandra's voice was low but urgent. "You don't understand. That's Emily Carter." The voice came from behind her, deep, commanding, with an authority that silenced the entire cabin. Captain Richard Hale stood at the front of first class, his pilot's uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. "Step aside," he said. Emily's chest tightened as she turned to face him. "Captain Hale, now," he said, his voice brooking no argument. Emily stepped back reluctantly as the captain approached the man she had confronted. Hale's face softened as he extended a hand. "Mr. Washington," Hale said, "it's an honor to have you aboard again." A ripple of recognition swept through the cabin as gasps and whispers erupted like an incoming tide. Phones that hadn't been recording now clicked into action. Emily's face went pale as understanding dawned, crashing over her like a breaking wave. Denzel Washington, Academy Award-winning actor, philanthropist, and, most damningly for her, a major investor and brand ambassador for the very airline she worked for. Sandra's voice was little more than a hiss as she leaned toward Emily. "What have you done?" The air seemed to thrum with tension as Emily's ears roared. She barely heard Denzel's voice as he spoke to the captain. "Richard, I'd like to have a word about how your staff treats people, especially in first class." The captain nodded gravely. "Of course, sir." Denzel's eyes flicked back to Emily, calm yet piercing, as if he could see straight through her. Emily's throat went dry as the weight of what she had just done settled over her like a shroud. She didn't need Sandra to whisper the next words. She already knew. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." Emily Carter's apartment was small but pristine, a reflection of her meticulous personality. The glass coffee table gleamed in the soft light of the early morning sun, and her perfectly aligned collection of magazines spoke of a woman who needed control in every detail of her life. As she stood before the mirror adjusting the scarf that would soon adorn her neck as part of her uniform, her mind raced. Not with excitement, but with the kind of restless energy that often came before a flight she knew would challenge her patience. "You've worked too hard for this?" she whispered to herself, smoothing out the sharp creases in her navy blue blouse. Her reflection nodded back in silent agreement. Emily had clawed her way up from economy class assignments to first class in under 3 years, a feat most of her colleagues envied. To her, first class was not just a cabin. It was sacred ground reserved for society's elite, and it was her duty to ensure it stayed that way. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her reverie. A message from her friend Tara lit up the screen. "Don't forget to send me pics if you see anyone famous, or any crazy imposters trying to sneak in again, lol." Emily smirked. There had been plenty of those. Passengers who had no business being in first class yet managed to talk their way past distracted gate agents. Like the guy last month who'd worn a fake Rolex and claimed he was an NBA player, until someone actually recognized the real athlete wasn't even in the country. She had personally seen to it that he was escorted off the plane. She tapped a quick reply. "If someone tries today, they won't make it past me." As she grabbed her flight bag and stepped into the hallway, Emily didn't realize that today's flight would test her principles in ways she could never imagine. At the airport, the terminal was alive with the usual morning chaos. Business travelers in tailored suits shuffled by, earbuds in place, briefcases clutched tight. Families wrangled children and strollers, and solo adventurers stared at departure boards with wide-eyed wonder. Emily, however, floated through it all with a practiced elegance, her chin lifted and her pace steady. When she reached the crew lounge, Sandra Lee, the senior attendant for today's flight, was already there, sipping coffee. Sandra had been flying for over 15 years and carried the kind of calm Emily both admired and resented. "Morning, Emily," Sandra said warmly. "You're on first class today, right?" "Of course," Emily replied with a slight smile. "Wouldn't have it any other way." Sandra chuckled. "Keep an eye out. We've got some VIPs on this one. And remember, first class is about service, not policing." Emily stiffened at the comment. "You know I don't let standards slip, Sandra. That's why I'm good at what I do." Sandra gave her a measured look but said nothing. As Emily made her way to the gate, she reflected on Sandra's words. Service was important, yes, but so was maintaining the atmosphere that distinguished first class from the chaos of economy. The people up front paid thousands for peace, luxury, and a sense of exclusivity. Her job was to protect that, even if it meant making tough calls. She remembered one incident vividly. A young man in designer sneakers and a hoodie who had insisted he belonged in first class. He hadn't. Emily had spotted him as soon as he boarded and sensed something off. Her instincts were correct. He was bumped back to economy after failing to produce a valid boarding pass. That was the kind of vigilance that kept her superiors praising her performance. And yet, there were moments, rare but persistent, when a voice in the back of her mind asked if her vigilance sometimes veered into something less noble. Emily brushed the thought aside. At the gate, the crew gathered for a quick briefing. Captain Richard Hale joined them, his presence commanding as always. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "We've got a smooth flight ahead, but let's remember we're carrying a few notable passengers today. Discretion and professionalism as always." Emily caught his eye and gave a small nod. As boarding began, Emily stationed herself at the first-class entrance, scanning boarding passes with quick precision. She could tell within seconds whether a passenger belonged in this cabin. The expensive watch, the understated yet clearly designer luggage, the calm air of someone accustomed to luxury. All markers she'd learned to identify. Then she saw him, a tall man in a tailored suit, moving with an ease that suggested confidence but not arrogance. His sunglasses covered his eyes, but there was something about the way he held himself that caught her attention. And then, as he removed the glasses, she noticed the necklace. A large gold cross, catching the light with every step he took. Her gut reaction was swift and certain. That's unusual. A man like him, black, wearing a necklace that bold, didn't fit the image she had constructed in her mind for first-class passengers. Emily forced a polite smile as he handed over his boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington," she said automatically, her eyes flicking to the necklace. "Thank you," he replied, his deep voice calm and pleasant. She let him pass but made a mental note. Perhaps a quiet word later would suffice. After all, wasn't it her job to ensure all passengers felt comfortable in first class? As boarding continued, she couldn't stop her mind from circling back to him. That necklace, so prominent, so loud. She imagined the reactions of the other passengers, some of whom valued subtlety above all else. Was he really who he claimed to be? Emily didn't know it yet, but that fleeting question, born from years of subtle conditioning and unacknowledged biases, would soon become the spark that ignited her downfall. And by the time the wheels lifted off the runway, Emily Carter was unknowingly speeding toward the moment her carefully curated career would shatter in the space of 5 short minutes. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm, golden glow as the last few passengers settled into their leather seats. A quiet murmur filled the first-class cabin, business travelers checking emails, an elderly couple debating between wine selections, and the subtle rustle of newspapers. Emily Carter moved through the aisle with the precision of a conductor managing a symphony. Every detail had to be perfect. Every passenger had to feel they were in a world far removed from the chaos behind the thick curtains separating them from economy class. But her focus kept returning to one seat, Denzel Washington sat comfortably in 2A, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a hardcover novel open in his hands. His presence was calm, almost meditative, but the gold cross around his neck gleamed under the cabin lights like a challenge to Emily's sense of order. She had watched as other passengers gave him brief glances, some in quiet recognition, others with neutral expressions. Still, her instincts screamed at her that something about this man felt out of place. It wasn't his demeanor. That was impeccable. It wasn't his attire. The tailored suit fit him perfectly. But the necklace, large, bold, and conspicuous, gnawed at her like a splinter she couldn't ignore. She approached with steady steps, forcing a composed smile as she stopped at his seat. "Good evening, sir," she began softly, her tone honeyed but carrying an undercurrent of authority. Denzel looked up slowly, his deep brown eyes meeting hers with quiet curiosity. "Good evening." Emily clasped her hands in front of her. "I hope you're comfortable. May I offer you something to drink?" "Thank you, I'm fine for now." She nodded, pausing just long enough to let her gaze flick briefly to the gold cross before returning to his eyes. "Sir, I wanted to bring something to your attention regarding the necklace you're wearing." His brow furrowed slightly. "My necklace?" "Yes," she said, keeping her voice low and measured. "We strive to maintain a certain refined atmosphere in first class. Large or overly ornate accessories can sometimes cause discomfort among other passengers." A moment of silence stretched between them, thickening the air like approaching storm clouds. "Are you asking me to remove it?" Denzel asked, his voice calm but with a subtle edge creeping in. Emily held her posture. "It's a request, sir. If you could remove it for the duration of the flight, I'm sure it would help maintain the quiet, understated environment our guests expect." Denzel closed his book softly, placing it on the tray table. He folded his hands over it, the cross necklace still resting against his shirt, glinting in the soft light. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice still calm. "You're asking me to take off my cross because it doesn't fit your image of first class?" Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Not my image, sir. The airline's standard for passenger decorum." 2 rows back, Marcus Green paused mid-sip of his champagne, his eyes narrowing as he listened. He leaned slightly toward his wife and whispered, "Is she serious right now?" His wife's hand gripped his arm. "Don't get involved," she murmured, though her own expression reflected disbelief. Denzel let out a soft chuckle, the sound deep and measured. "You know, I've been on plenty of flights. First class, business class, even coach back in the day. Never once has anyone asked me to take off my cross." "Why now?" Emily kept her voice firm. "Sir, we simply ask all passengers to be mindful of accessories that might be considered excessive." "Excessive?" he repeated, his tone now carrying a quiet weight that made Emily's stomach tighten. "Yes," she said, "and I would appreciate your cooperation." He leaned back in his seat, his eyes locked on hers, calm but unyielding. "And if I say no?" Emily's hands tightened slightly. She could feel the eyes of nearby passengers watching, phones raised discreetly, their screens glowing faintly in the dim light. "Then, sir," she said, her voice firmer now, "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to deplane." The murmur in the cabin rose slightly, like the low rumble of a brewing storm. A passenger 3 seats away whispered, "Is she kicking him off?" Denzel exhaled slowly, as though steadying himself. "Let me make sure I understand this. You're asking me to either take off my cross, which is a symbol of my faith, or leave this plane." "Yes, sir," Emily said, her voice tight. "Those are your options." "Emily." The voice came from behind her. It was Sandra Lee, her tone sharp but quiet, carrying years of experience and warning in equal measure. Emily turned, annoyed. "Sandra, I'm handling this." Sandra stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're not handling it. You're about to light a fire you can't put out. That's Denzel Washington." Emily blinked, her expression stiffening as the words sank in. "What?" "That man is Denzel Washington," Sandra repeated. You're standing here lecturing an Academy Award winner, a philanthropist, and, she dropped her voice lower still, a VIP partner with this airline. Emily's mouth went dry, but she held her posture. I didn't recognize him. Sandra's eyes flashed. And you're about to recognize just how badly you've messed up. A ripple of recognition spread through the cabin as more passengers caught on. Whispers turned to murmurs. That's Denzel Washington? Why is she talking to him like that? Someone's filming this, right? Emily felt her face flush hot as the weight of dozens of eyes pressed down on her. Denzel sat in silence, his expression calm but his eyes piercing, as though they could see straight through her. I'd like to speak with the captain, he said finally, his tone low but carrying absolute authority. At that moment, Captain Richard Hale stepped into the cabin. His presence commanded instant silence. His sharp uniform and steady gaze seemed to freeze the tension in place. What's going on here? He asked. Emily turned, her voice faltering slightly. Captain, I was addressing a concern regarding passenger attire. Emily Carter. The captain's tone was flat, deadly calm. Step aside. Captain, Now. The single word cut through her protest like a blade. Emily stepped back, her hands trembling slightly, as Hale turned his full attention to Denzel. Mr. Washington, the captain said, his voice warm with respect. It's an honor to have you aboard again. Denzel nodded slightly. Captain Hale. The murmur in the cabin grew louder now as passengers realized the gravity of the situation. Phones that hadn't been recording before were now held aloft, tiny red dots glowing as videos streamed live to the outside world. Emily's stomach sank as she saw a young woman across the aisle typing furiously into her phone. This is gonna blow up on Twitter, Marcus Green muttered under his breath. Captain Hale's voice broke through Emily's fog of panic. Emily, please meet me at the galley. Now. She followed him in silence, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the hum of the engines. When they were out of earshot, Hale turned on her, his voice low and sharp. Do you have any idea who you just confronted? I didn't recognize him, Emily stammered. He's one of this airline's biggest investors and a global icon. And you just threatened to throw him off the plane over a necklace? Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. You thought wrong, Hale snapped. Go sit down. You're done for the night. The video spread like wildfire. By the time Flight 743 was 30 minutes into the air, snippets of Emily Carter's confrontation with Denzel Washington were already circulating across every major social media platform. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all flooded with hashtags like hashtag Denzel disrespected, hashtag first class fail, and hashtag airline shame. It wasn't just the image of a celebrity being wrongly confronted that sparked the outrage. It was the context, the implication of racial profiling, religious discrimination, and classist undertones rolled into one humiliating incident, all unfolding under the gaze of shocked passengers armed with smartphone cameras. In one particular video, Emily's words rang out clearly despite the ambient cabin noise. Take off the necklace or get off the plane. The sentence echoed like a slap across the digital sphere. The internet responded with immediate fury. The comments were merciless. That necklace is a cross. She just tried to humiliate Denzel Washington for wearing a cross? Imagine not recognizing Denzel Washington and then thinking he's the one in the wrong. She saw a black man with confidence and faith and couldn't handle it. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, airline public relations executives were receiving alerts from their crisis monitoring software. One screen after another turned red as mentions spiked, engagement metrics exploded, and the airline's brand became the center of a brewing firestorm. At the airline's global headquarters in New York, the early warning system triggered a red flag. Inside the sleek, glass-paneled crisis response room, James Parker, the airline's vice president of global communications, watched with a growing sense of dread. A junior analyst rushed in holding a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. James looked down and tapped the screen. A video began to play, the confrontation between Emily and Denzel, captured from two different angles by two different passengers. In one, The flight attendant's expression was hard and condescending. In the other, Denzel's calm resistance only made her look worse. James exhaled, muttering, "Damn it." The airline's logo sat uncomfortably close to Denzel's image in every frame, subtly reinforcing the narrative that this was not just a single employee's mistake. It was institutional failure. Within minutes, James was on the phone with the airline's legal counsel, HR director, and CEO. "I want a full investigation launched immediately," he said, "and we need to draft a holding statement. Now, if we delay, we lose control of the story." Meanwhile, back in the skies, Emily sat in the crew's jump seat at the rear of the plane, her hands trembling. She had been pulled from service after her encounter with Denzel and reassigned to the galley, her authority suspended mid-flight. She tried to distract herself by organizing cups and napkins, but every movement felt mechanical. Sandra passed by, her eyes cold. "You should prepare yourself, Emily. The videos are already out. The world knows." Emily turned sharply. "I was following policy." Sandra leaned in, her voice a low, controlled whisper. "No, you were following your assumptions. And now it's out of your hands." Back in first class, Denzel sat quietly, sipping from a bottle of water as he watched the cabin settle back into uneasy silence. Marcus Green, seated across the aisle, leaned in slightly. "She really didn't recognize you?" he asked. Denzel gave a soft shake of his head. "Didn't matter if she did or not. She already decided I didn't belong. You handled it like a king." Denzel didn't reply immediately. He looked down at the cross still resting on his chest. "There's nothing dignified about being told your faith is too loud for first class." Marcus nodded, his face tightening. "They're gonna regret this." By the time the plane landed in London, a crowd had already gathered at the arrival's terminal. Reporters, fans, and activists all held signs. Some read, "We stand with Denzel." Others bore messages like, "Faith is not offensive," and "Black excellence belongs everywhere." As Denzel stepped off the aircraft, he was greeted by security and quickly whisked through a private exit, but the message had already spread. The press camped outside the terminal wasn't there for a celebrity interview. They were waiting for answers from the airline. Emily, exiting much later through a crew-only path, was met with the same attention. Cameras caught her face as she tried to cover herself with her scarf, but it was too late. Screenshots from the in-flight videos had already plastered her image across trending headlines. She hurried into a staff van, her phone buzzing relentlessly. When she finally gathered the courage to look, she found hundreds of messages. Most were from strangers calling her every name imaginable. Racist, bigot, disgrace. But some messages hit deeper. Colleagues she admired, supervisors she hoped to impress, even friends who now said they couldn't stand by her. Inside the airline's crisis room, James Parker paced the floor. "We need to act now. Immediate damage control." "Should we suspend her officially?" the HR director asked. James nodded. "Immediately, and issue a formal apology to Mr. Washington. Get legal on standby for settlement negotiations. If he goes public before we get ahead of this, we're dead." An intern interrupted. "Sir, there's another issue. He's not just a passenger. He's listed as an investor, one of our VIP brand partners." James stopped cold. "You've got to be kidding me." The CEO, who had just arrived, overheard the statement. "Wait, Denzel Washington is one of our investors." "Yes, sir. He owns a significant stake through his production company. He also appeared in 2 ad campaigns last year." The CEO looked as if he'd been punched. Jesus Christ. Now the stakes weren't just about public image. They were about internal collapse. James grabbed his phone and started dialing. "I need to speak with his team. Now, I don't care what time zone they're in. We need to apologize, explain, offer full accountability, whatever it takes." The response from Denzel's camp came a few hours later. "Mr. Washington is deeply disappointed. He is reviewing the footage, consulting his legal advisors, and considering public response options. Translation, he's pissed, and he may very well go public." Inside her hotel room, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, still in her uniform, staring blankly at the TV as news anchors debated whether the airline's apology would be enough. Veteran actor and philanthropist Denzel Washington was reportedly humiliated aboard Flight 743 by a flight attendant who allegedly demanded he remove a gold cross necklace or leave the plane. She muted the TV. Her phone buzzed again, another notification. Her name was now trending on social media, not in admiration, not in sympathy, but as a pariah. She opened her email to find a notification from the airline's HR department. Subject: immediate suspension, pending review. Her hands shook as she opened the message. The words blurred through her tears. Effective immediately, suspension from duties pending formal investigation. Failure to uphold standards of conduct. Her throat closed. All the years she had worked, the standards she upheld, the ambition that carried her from coach to first class. It had all collapsed in less than 10 minutes. She thought of her parents, who had once proudly told their friends that their daughter worked first class on international flights. She thought of Tara, who would surely be watching this unfold, horrified, and she thought bitterly of Denzel's calm voice, his steady gaze, and how he never once raised his voice. Back in New York, the airline prepared its official press statement. James Parker reviewed the final draft. We offer our sincerest apology to Mr. Denzel Washington for the inexcusable treatment he experienced while aboard Flight 743. This incident does not reflect the values or standards of our company. Immediate corrective actions are being taken. We stand for dignity, diversity, and inclusion at every level. He paused, then added a final sentence. Our employees will undergo mandatory anti-bias and religious tolerance training effective immediately. His team hit send, and the statement went live. But the firestorm was far from over. Because apologies could be forgotten, lawsuits could be settled. But humiliation, especially public humiliation, left scars that changed reputations forever. And the man Emily tried to embarrass was not just any man. He was Denzel Washington. The conference room at the airline's global headquarters was filled with a palpable sense of dread. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a breathtaking view of the New York skyline, but no one inside the room was paying attention. Instead, they were glued to the massive display screens mounted on the walls, each one showing live metrics, trending hashtags, and news clips that seemed to grow worse by the hour. Hashtag airline shame had been trending at #1 for 6 hours straight. On one screen, a popular news anchor was shaking his head in disbelief. How does an airline attendant not recognize Denzel Washington? And even if she didn't, what gives her the right to demand he remove a religious symbol or leave the plane? This is beyond a mistake. This is a PR catastrophe. James Parker, the vice president of global communications, pinched the bridge of his nose. He had weathered storms before, delayed flights, lost luggage, even a mid-flight technical failure, but nothing like this. This was different. This wasn't about machines or schedules. This was about a human failure, and it had the internet on fire. Seated at the head of the table, the airline's CEO, Charles Whitmore, looked pale and tense. His voice was low and controlled, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "Tell me again how this happened," Whitmore said.